Peace and blessings. Welcome back to the channel once again, where we talk all things health and healing from a holistic perspective, and today will be no different. Today is going to be a big emphasis on the word holistic, looking at you and your health from a holistic perspective. Now, quite often when people go into the clinic or they go into the doctor, and whatever issue that they may have, or they feel like something's shifting in their body, they're trying to communicate what is going on inside of them, okay? And quite often when it's something that's not cookie cutter, and they're trying to explain what's going on, and then the doctor comes back and says, hey, I pricked your arm, got blood, checked it, it was fine. I took your blood pressure, that was fine. Took your temperature, that was fine. Everything looks great, and then they send you home, but you know something is off, okay? So this is what that conversation is centered around. It's so important to understand when it comes to healing, you're not just healing your physical self, okay? A lot of times our physical ailments are coming from emotional and mental trauma, okay? And I think having this conversation today will help connect the dots and help you see how these two are very intimately connected. When we think about not just trauma that happened recently, I'm thinking about even childhood traumas that are playing a role, not only in how you show up in life, but also how this dis-ease shows up in your body as well too. And I've quite often had people who I've changed their diet, we got them exercising, we put them on herbs, we detox them, and still nothing worked. And it wasn't until we started to address these unresolved traumas that they had swept under the rug, forgotten about, and disowned, that they started the actual heal physically, okay? So it's just really important to understand. Now, let me give you a little something to help you understand that this isn't something I'm just making up. According to the University of California, San Francisco, unresolved trauma is the hidden cause of most preventable diseases. As a matter of fact, it's associated with 8 out of 10 preventable conditions or causes of death, okay? This includes heart disease, it includes cancer, it also includes lung disease and kidney disease, it also includes suicide, accidental overdose, diabetes, stroke, and all of those sound all too familiar. And so it's just really important to understand that this isn't something I'm saying from a whole spiritual standpoint or esoteric standpoint. Emotional and mental trauma can actually manifest itself as physical dis-ease, okay? And as we go through today, I'm gonna show you how certain emotions show up in the body, okay? But before we do that, let's first sort of define trauma so that you understand what trauma is. Because this is a journey that I had to go on for myself personally. And it's the reason why I wrote my last book that I'll share with you guys at the end. And my book and sharing it with you was really an opportunity to display my healing journey so that it can encourage and inspire others to do the same, okay? So what is trauma? Trauma isn't just what happens to you, it's also how you perceive what happened to you, okay? Now, what I mean by that is this. You can have two people go through the very same thing, okay? Let's say, for instance, you can have two people who grew up in a home where maybe their parents, hit them physically, all right? And for one child, that abuse, it could have been at the same level, all right? That abuse could have been traumatic. For another child, like myself, growing up and experiencing that, I never saw it as, trauma. I just saw it as, all right, I see my neighbor, like the kids over there, they get a spanking when they do this. This person over there, they get it when they do this. It's a common thing. So to me, it was just, this is what happens when you break the rules, So that is a really important point because it's not just on that level, it's on all levels, okay? And the example that I give people, because in my book, well, actually in my workbook, so My book comes with a workbook. And in there, I write down all the things, all the traumatic things that happened to me. Okay. And when I wrote all of those things down, a friend of mine, read my book, and they were going through their workbook, and they wanted me to kind of help them navigate going through the workbook as well too. And they were like, well, let me see what you wrote down for trauma, because I really can't define trauma. And as they're going through the things that I wrote down as trauma, and they were like, hey, well, I remember, like, and this actually happened to me, like as a kid, I saw somebody get unalived, like in front of me with an assault rifle. And he said, why didn't you put that down? And I was like, I don't even, like, when I think trauma, that doesn't even come up for me. And he was like, well, why doesn't that come up for you? I said, because it happened so often where I grew up. So like for me, it wasn't traumatic. I was like, to be honest with you, only thing I can remember after seeing that was like, I'm thankful it's not me. As a kid, that's the only thing I thought about. So that's what I mean by sometimes even things that are truly like traumatic experiences, your perception of it could be very different. And I had the same conversation with a female friend of mine who I'm very close with, and she was molested as a child, and her sister was too. And for her, she never saw the molestation as trauma, versus her sister, it impacted her so much. And so that's one of the things that through conversations with other people and then my own personal experience, I came to understand that trauma is really how we perceive the events. Because again, we can literally see events very differently, even when we're in the trauma ourselves. So that's the first thing. So trauma isn't just what happens to you, it's also how you perceive what happens to you, okay? And the other thing is trauma can be physical, it could be mental, it could be emotional, it could be spiritual, and it can even be generational. And what I mean by generational is that the trauma that you experience and you don't even know where it comes from, it could come from your great aunt. It can come from your grandfather. It can come from your mother, your father. It can come from someone in your generational line. So that is a whole nother conversation, but we could also experience generational trauma as well too. And I'll give some examples later of, people I've worked with. And these are people who I've worked with. And we were working on getting their high blood pressure together, or, their cholesterol down, and it turned into a trauma session. Okay, so it's just really important to understand how interconnected these are. Okay, now the other thing I think is really important is to understand that, okay, we go through these experiences, these traumas. And when we go through these traumas, we think because we went through the trauma as a child and now that we're an adult, and maybe we've been successful in life, we're under the impression that we've healed from that trauma. But what most people don't understand is that when you go through trauma, what trauma does, especially when you don't embrace what happened, when you don't allow yourself to feel what happened, when you don't have the avenues to talk about what happened or to express what happened. And sometimes those avenues aren't provided. Sometimes we're in situations where our parents say, tough it up, whatever it may be. But when you go through that trauma and you don't allow yourself to fully process it and express it, it gets trapped in your body. Okay. And when I say trapped in your body, I mean literally trapped in your body, especially, when you're thinking about trauma. Trauma isn't, based on positivity. Okay. Trauma isn't based on joy. When you experience joy, joy is a vibration that resonates with you, meaning you're already on the vibration of joy. So when you're experiencing it, you're just being in a state of gratitude about the joy. When you're laughing, that you're already on that. That's your default level. Okay. When you love, that's your default level. These are default emotions. Okay. I wouldn't even call them positive, because the truth of the matter is these are how we're supposed to feel as human beings. Okay. So these are our default settings. These are our default radio station. Okay. I said, like when you get in your car, you got different programs or stations that you can turn to. You can listen to jazz over here. You can listen to hip hop here. You can listen to a little bit of orchestra here or classical music. Okay, you want to listen to a little bit of neo soul, just tap into them. They're already preset. Okay, so your presets are things like love, joy, laughter, okay, giving. These are presets. Okay, but the things that aren't, okay, that aren't aligned with those, these are things that take these high vibrational emotions like love and joy and happiness, okay, and then you pair them with traumatic experiences that create toxic emotions, okay? And again, the reason why they're toxic, just think of it like this, okay? Your ability to remove toxicity will determine how toxic you become. The same way with drinking alcohol, okay? There are people who can have 10 drinks and, they're fine. They can walk out of the party, no problem. But if I have one, I'm done. And this is before I stopped drinking. Okay. So I've always been a lightweight. So you got people who can handle different levels of toxicity, right? Same thing with emotions. Okay. As I was mentioning earlier with the example, I grew up in a neighborhood where, unfortunately, violence was a common thing. Not normal, but common. And the reason why I say not normal is because violence isn't normal. It's just in certain neighborhoods, it could be common. Okay. And because it was so common, I got desensitized to it. So for me, my tolerance for violence was very high. All right. So when I experienced violence, even in the form of like fistfights growing up as a kid, I never interpreted it as trauma. So these things never made my list. Because again, it wasn't just about what happened to me, it was how I perceived it. I didn't perceive those type of things. However, there were things that to me were very traumatic, okay? And I always knew that violence, again, was never normal, okay? But I became desensitized to it. And there were things that were, trigger points for me. And those are the things that when I didn't allow myself to express it, and I didn't feel protected or whatever it is as a kid, these are the things that did leave a mark, because that's what trauma does. Trauma leaves a mark. And often that mark is traumatic emotions, okay? And that trauma will live in the body, as I mentioned before. So let me give you a few examples of how trauma lives in the body, okay? If your trauma leads to you creating anger, okay, then anger will live in your liver and your gallbladder. Okay, so later on in life, you may have liver and gallbladder issues. Okay, if your trauma is fear, okay, so if your trauma leads to fear, okay, programming fear into you as a result of experiencing that trauma, then the toxic emotion of fear will lead to kidney and bladder issues. Okay, that's really important as well too. And I always tell people there are also counters to these, what I will call low vibrational emotions. All right. So the counter to fear is faith. Okay. Because when you think about it, at the end of the day, most of the things that we fear are projections. They're not things that actually happen. Like, how many times have you been walking down a dark alley and saw somebody coming your way and you started to think about what could happen? Okay. Most of the times when we're in fear, or fear in a relationship, that it may go wrong, or the person may leave you or cheat on you or whatever it may be, most of our fear is coming from the premonition of fear, like the future thought of something going wrong. Okay. So the opposite of that would be faith. It will be meaning a person in fear. And again, this will come from the trauma. Okay. And the one on my list was a trauma that led to fear. And I talk about it in my book, how the people who have the most fear are often the people who are the most dangerous and violent. Okay. So fear is a traumatic response that lives in the body, specifically in the kidneys and the bladder as well too. You also have sadness and grief. Okay, sadness and grief lives in the lungs. So a person who experienced sadness and grief, okay, this person will probably end up having asthma or have a lot of upper respiratory infections or sinus infections, okay? All right, so it's just really important to understand how, again, these, depending on the emotion, it lives in different places in the body as well too. And then worry. So if you're a worrier, okay, you're the kind of person that worries all the time, where the toxic emotion of, or low vibrational emotion of worry, okay, will lead to living in the spleen. And the spleen is responsible for filtering the blood. Okay, it's also responsible for producing white blood cells. Okay, so you may go into your doctor and he may say, your white blood cell count is low. Okay. And no matter what you do, I mean, you're eating a perfect diet, you're exercising, you're getting enough sun, but your white blood cell count is still low. Okay, so that's another sort of physical manifestation of a low vibrational emotion or traumatic emotion as well too. Anxiety. Anxiety lives in the gut. You know that when you start to get anxiety, you feel it in the pit of your gut. Okay, so this person is going to have gut issues like irritable bowel syndrome, okay, or gut dysbiosis. Okay, so a lot of our unresolved trauma will lead to low vibrational emotions. Okay, and when I say low vibrational, we're not going to put a label of good or bad on it. It takes you out of your default setting, which is love, which is happiness, which is laughter. Okay, it takes you out of that default setting and it lowers your vibration. That's all it is. There's no need to look at it as good and bad. That's useless. Okay, but it's just really important to understand that you have to be responsible for these emotions, the same way you have to be responsible if you're drinking alcohol. Okay, you know that alcohol can lead to not only sedation, but a lowering of brain function. Okay, this is what people call tipsy. And intoxicated is the point that you cannot, not only can you not drive, you cannot walk properly. Okay, so we get drunk on these type of emotions because ultimately what happens is that we get attached to these emotions as well too. All right, so it's hugely important to understand that, again, these unresolved traumas will turn into these low vibrational emotions that live in our body and create and manifest dis-ease. All right, so now the question is why is healing trauma essential? I mean, everything that I just mentioned is sort of the answer to that, but I'm going to give you some more specific answers so that you'll understand why this is probably the foundation of what you need to do. If you try to eat a healthier diet and you always notice that despite the fact that you're like, okay, I'm pretty conventional. I do not need to be eating bread, or I do not need to be eating dairy, because every time I eat it, I get constipated and I don't have bowel movements, or, I break out in my skin, or I need to stop eating meat, or I need to stop eating this, whatever it may be. You've already convinced yourself that you do not need to eat this food, but then as soon as lunch comes or dinner comes, boom, you're right back in it. And it's almost like an addiction. All right, so I'm going to break down why healing trauma is so essential. All right, so the number one reason why healing trauma is so essential to not only your physical healing, but the bigger picture, is because the healed version of you and the unhealed version of you make very different decisions. Okay, that 8-year-old version of you that experienced trauma, okay, created not only barriers and boundaries, but it created thought processes and belief systems that are still playing and functioning today in your 30-year-old version of yourself, 40-year-old version of yourself, 60, 70-year-old version of yourself. Okay? And what you'll notice is when you go through this healing process, man, it's going to be eye-opening, because what you're going to wake up to is all the decisions that you've made as the unhealed version of yourself. And you may notice that you don't like some of the hobbies that you have. You may notice that you don't actually like the foods that you say that you love. You may notice that the person that you're waking up to is a stranger to you. Okay? So it's just really important to understand that, the healed version of you and the unhealed version of you, they made totally different decisions. Okay? They see life totally different. All right? It's a whole nother set of goggles. The healed version of you versus the unhealed version of you. What you see as the unhealed version of you and what you see as the healed version of you is totally different. I mean, the healed version of me, when I see somebody striking out in anger, I realize that that's a hurt person. But I can only see that in the healed version of myself. When I was the unhealed version of myself, when I saw anger, I matched that vibration, that low vibration, with the same vibration, which was anger. Okay? When somebody was aggressive with me, I would match that low vibrational signature with the same vibration. Okay? That's what I did when I was unhealed. But the healed version of me, I see with a new set of goggles. I see the truth. I see the hurt. Okay? And instead of me trying to match their vibration, because I know what damage that would not only do to them, it would do to me, because I would just be enabling them. Okay? And then I would be pulling myself down from my divine state of love and peace and happiness and joy. Okay? So the healed version of you, number one, is very different, makes very different decisions from the unhealed version of you. All right? Number two. The number two reason is because toxic emotions lead to dis-ease, as I mentioned before. So you may be trying to heal your high blood pressure. You may be trying to heal your gut by changing the foods that you eat. And you may have actually eat all of the foods that you need to eat and still have an unhealthy gut. Okay? Because you're still choosing to have anxiety. Okay? And you're choosing to have anxiety because you're choosing not to deal with those unresolved traumas. Okay? So again, if you truly want to not only heal dis-ease in your body, but also prevent dis-ease. Okay? So maybe you're not there yet. All right? Healing these unresolved traumas is going to be very essential. Okay? Number three. I would say number three is the healed version of ourselves is the only way we can experience peace, both in our body and in the world. Okay? The healed version of ourselves is how we truly experience peace, not only in our body, but in the world too, as I mentioned before. And so if you feel like you haven't gotten the peace, okay, and I can substitute peace for the word abundance, okay? Sometimes, the abundance that we're not receiving is because we're the unhealed version of ourselves. And this is going to lead me to number four. And the unhealed version of ourselves, all right, and number four is the foundation of self-sabotage. Okay? So whenever you try to do anything to complete a goal, whenever you try to achieve something that you put your mind to, whenever you say, you know what, I'm going to stop dating this type of person, when I look back, it seems like I've been dating all of my life. But then you start dating again and you notice that it's the same person showing up again. It could be unresolved trauma that is self-sabotaging you. And that's what a lot of people really don't understand about unresolved trauma. unresolved trauma is not just, again, it's not just the experience, but it's how we perceive that experience. And the other thing that I'll add on now is what it does to us as a result of how we perceive that experience that we went through, and then the barriers and the thought processes and the beliefs and the thinking and programming that we now have because we went through that trauma. Okay? And most of the time when you go through unresolved trauma, and it may not affect every area of your life, because I see people with trauma who seem to be highly functional when it comes to work, but then when they come home, the function is dysfunctional. Okay? Or when they go, you look at their finances, it may be dysfunctional. Okay? So it's just really important to understand that, again, trauma is one of the foundations, or unresolved trauma is one of the foundations of self-sabotage. So if you're not getting what you want out of life, it could be as a result of that as well too. Okay? And then number 5, I would say number 5 is your emotional and spiritual trauma may be blocking your physical healing. Okay? Let me give you a perfect example. Okay? I was working with somebody a woman who had lupus. Okay? And one of the things I was telling her was that you have to stop cooking. You have to start cooking for yourself and stop eating out, because most of the restaurants that you go to, they cook their foods in seed oils. And seed oils are very inflammatory to the body. And one of the issues with lupus is inflammation. All right, that inflammation starts in the gut, but then it goes to the kidneys, so lupus can ruin the kidneys, okay? But it could cause overall inflammation and problems in the lower legs as well too. And so what I was telling her, it's really important that you start to make your own food so that you can quality control all the ingredients in the process and making your food, so you know exactly what you're getting. And she said, I don't know what it is, but I just stopped cooking because I felt like every time I would cook, maybe it was the smells, maybe it was me chopping things, or I don't know exactly what it is, but I always got a headache when I would cook. And I said, well, maybe, I don't know. I was like, you think it's onions? And no, I don't. So I said, well, do this. I said, what I want you to do is make a salad, all right? And what I want you to do is, I want you to make the salad, go out and then if you make the salad and nothing is chopped, we'll go from there, all right? So she makes a salad, and as she's putting this salad together, sure enough, she starts to get a dull headache. All right, so I'm like, okay, so it's not onions. She didn't chop anything, because I know how some people can be sensitive to smell. And so I said, okay. I said, try this for me. I want you to go in the living room. I want you to sit down, watch something nice. And as you're watching something nice, kind of put some food together on the coffee table. And she said, all right, that sounds crazy, but I'll try it. She tries it and calls me and goes, you know what? It worked. I didn't get a headache. I said, okay. I said, well, do this. Maybe take your phone in the kitchen, put something nice on your phone to watch, okay? And cook in the kitchen, see what happens. Sure enough, she gets a headache. All right, so then at this point, I'm out of like ideas. So the last thing on my mind was, has anything ever happened in the kitchen with you, like that was traumatic for you? She said, no, other than the headaches. I said, what about as a child? She said, I can't remember anything happening as a child, but I do remember like going in the kitchen with my mom, and sometimes when I would be in there with her, I would get a headache. I said, okay. I said, do me a favor, go ask your mother. Ask your mother, has anything ever happened to you in the kitchen that was traumatic? She goes to her mom and she asks her mom, Mom, did anything ever happen to me traumatic in the kitchen? And her mom freezes like a deer in the headlights. And her eyes are like just staring. And she goes, why would you ask me that? She said, because I've been getting headaches every time I come in the kitchen. And I don't have any food allergies. I forgot to mention that. We tried to see if she had food allergies. She said, I've made food out of the kitchen and didn't have any problems. But then when I come in the kitchen, I have problems. So, you know, the guy I'm working with, he just asked me to ask maybe if you or dad knew if something happened to me in the kitchen that maybe was traumatic and I don't remember and my body's just responding to it. Well, sure enough, her mom breaks down and cries. She was in the kitchen with her as a baby and she was cooking. And when she went to turn on the pilot to the stove, the flame from the pilot burst up, okay, and hit her in the face and burnt her face. And in the process, she dropped her and she hit her head as a small baby, okay? So she had to literally go through this process of talking it out with her mom and hugging it out with her mom, because her mom was also traumatized by the event as well too. Not her mom wasn't even traumatized by the fire that was, you know, burned her face. She was more traumatized and felt guilty for dropping her baby. And so they went through therapy together with this, and now she can cook in the kitchen. Okay, so hopefully this helps. Just wanted to be able to share this with you because I know a lot of people out there, you know, are trying to figure out how does healing actually work, not treatment that you go to modern medicine to get, but how does healing actually work? And this is one of the very pivotal things when it comes to healing that people often skipped over, okay? And so one of the things I want to share with you is my book, Life is My Guru. This is actually a copy that one of my readers read, and you know, they really loved the book. And they sent me a picture of how much they had highlighted. And so I said, I'll tell you what, if you send me your book, you know, I'll actually send you a signed copy and a few other things. And so they sent me their book. And so one of the things that they highlighted in the book, I thought was, you know, and they wrote a whole, I won't read what they wrote about it, but how it changed, how they thought about trauma. And so what I want to do is read it to you. And that way you can kind of understand, again, a little bit more about trauma, because my book, Life is My Guru, it's a practical guide to understanding what your life experiences are trying to teach you. Okay? Not just trauma, but life in general, everything that has happened to you. Because I believe that we're, again, spiritual beings having a human experience, and that this whole human experience is a curriculum just for our learning. So I'm going to read this to you, and then we're going to wrap it up for today. All right. So most of who and what we think we are just layers of mass stacked on top of each other. Each mass represents a personality trait we've created to cover up the pain of previous traumatic experiences. The mass help us survive the experience in the moment, but will eventually lead to dis-ease. Dis meaning apart from, to take away. Ease meaning peace. Disease, dis-ease, creating disharmony and anxiety in the body later in life. Okay? So I wanted to help you understand how trauma really plays a role, not only in how it manifests in our bodies, but also how it manifests disease as well too. So hopefully this has been helpful in guiding you along that journey. Hopefully it makes you a little bit braver, because I share my stories with you as well too, and be vulnerable. And I'm a very private person. And hopefully this gets you closer to the more healed version of yourself as well too. So please share this video with people. We need to get this kind of content out there, make it go viral, because it's all about healing. I believe that we are all individual cells of the body of God. And one cell being dysfunctional can turn into cancer. And I believe that when we're all healed, that's when we'll experience what it is, that oneness with God. we'll know that we're not separate anymore. Okay? So please share the content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And until the next time, peace and blessings and Godspeed.